I collapsed at work. Doctors called my son. He never showed up or called back. Music instead. His wife tagged me in a family photo. Perfect day without the drama queen. 3 days later, still hospitalized and weak. iMusic saw 83 missed calls from him asking for help. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Now, let me tell you exactly how I got here. Lying in this hospital bed, staring at my phone screen in disbelief at the sheer audacity of my own family. It started on a Tuesday morning at Henderson Insurance, where I'd worked for 12 years as a claims adjuster. Nothing special about the day. Just the usual mountain of paperwork and coffee that tasted like dishwater. I was reviewing a claim when the chest pain hit me like a freight train. Sharp, crushing, radiating down my left arm, exactly like they describe in those health pamphlets. Nobody reads until it's too late. Dorothy, my colleague Janet, rushed over as I gripped my desk, gasping, "Are you okay? Call ambulance." I managed, and everything went black. I woke up in the cardiac unit at St. Mary's with an IV in my arm and a very serious-looking cardiologist explaining that I'd had a mild heart attack. At 62, apparently, my body had decided to stage its own dramatic intervention. "We've contacted your emergency contact," Dr. Patterson said gently. "Your son Michael should be here soon." Should be. Those words echoed as I lay there for hours, watching the door, expecting to see Michael's familiar face, maybe even Cheryl, his wife of 8 years. The nurses kept checking on me, offering that sympathetic smile medical professionals perfect for situations exactly like this. Day 1 passed. No, Michael. Day 2 brought flowers from my coworkers and a get-well card from my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. Still no Michael. Day 3 was when I saw the Instagram notification on my phone. Cheryl had tagged me in a family photo. Michael, Cheryl, and their twin 7-year-olds at some fancy restaurant. All smiles and champagne glasses. The caption read, "Perfect day without the drama queen. Blessed and family time. Peaceful." I stared at that screen until my eyes burned. Drama queen. I'd been hospitalized for 3 days, and I was the drama queen. That's when my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp. 83 missed calls from Michael. The texts were frantic. "Mom, we need you urgently. Answer now. This is serious. Pick up the damn phone." I almost answered, almost fell back into that old pattern of dropping everything whenever my son needed something. But then I remembered that restaurant photo, Cheryl's smug smile, and the word that kept echoing, drama queen. Instead of answering, I did something that would change everything. I called my lawyer. "Mrs. Hartwell, are you absolutely certain about this?" Attorney Richard Morrison adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses as he reviewed the documents I'd requested. "This is quite comprehensive." I was sitting in his downtown office exactly 1 week after my hospital discharge, feeling stronger than I had in months. "Richard, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The past week had been enlightening, to say the least. Michael had shown up at my house the day after I was discharged. Not to check on my health, but to demand I return his calls immediately. When I'd calmly asked why he hadn't visited me in the hospital, he'd actually rolled his eyes. "Mom, you know how busy we are with the kids. Besides, Cheryl said you were probably faking it for attention anyway." Faking a heart attack for attention. At 62, that conversation had lasted exactly 5 minutes before I politely asked him to leave. The next day, I'd driven to Richard's office with a very specific request. "So, you want to revoke the financial power of attorney you granted Michael last year?" Richard flipped through the papers. "And you're changing your will completely. I'm also liquidating my retirement accounts and closing the joint savings account Michael has access to." I pulled out a manila folder. "I've prepared a list of every loan I've given him over the past 8 years. I want formal documentation for repayment terms." Richard's eyebrows rose. "May I ask, what prompted this change?" I told him about the hospital, the Instagram post, the complete absence of any concern for my well-being. By the time I finished, Richard was shaking his head. "Cheryl posted that while you were hospitalized, while I was lying there thinking I might die alone." "Yes." Richard made several notes. "The power of attorney revocation is straightforward. The will changes will take about 2 weeks. Regarding the loans," he paused. "Dorothy, the total here is significant. $47,000 over 8 years for various emergencies and investments that never materialized." I know. I kept records. I'd spent the previous evening going through old bank statements and check stubs. The numbers were staggering when you added them up. "I want a formal repayment plan, market rate interest, legal documentation. This will likely cause significant family tension." I thought about Cheryl's Instagram caption, about Michael's casual dismissal of my heart attack. About 8 years of being treated like an ATM with gray hair and a pulse. Richard, I've realized something important this week. I've been confusing being useful with being loved. That ends now. My phone buzzed with another text from Michael. Mom, this is ridiculous. Call me back. We have plans that require your help. Plans that required my help. Not, we're worried about you or glad you're okay. Just more demands on my resources. I showed Richard the text and he winced as he read the angry message glowing on my phone screen, then looked up at me and asked gently, when do you want to serve him with the documentation? And I answered without hesitation, tomorrow, and Richard, I want to be there when he gets it, because after everything that had happened, I needed to see his reaction with my own eyes, and the look on Michael's face when Richard handed him the legal papers was worth every penny. I was paying in attorney fees as we sat in Michael's pristine living room, the one I'd helped finance with a $20,000 emergency loan 2 years ago, and he stared at the stack of documents in disbelief and demanded, "What the hell is this?" while scanning the pages, his face growing redder with each one, and Richard explained calmly, "It's a formal loan agreement. Your mother is converting all previous financial assistance into documented loans with standard repayment terms." Just as Cheryl appeared from the kitchen, took one look at the papers in Michael's hands, and her perfectly mad-up face went pale while she said, "You can't be serious," addressing me directly for the first time in months, adding, "After everything we've done for you." Which almost made me laugh because everything they'd done for me included ignoring my heart attack to post family photos. So I asked quietly, "What exactly have you done for me, Cheryl?" keeping my voice pleasantly neutral even though my pulse was racing. And she gestured vaguely around their expensive living room and replied, "We include you in family events. We let the kids spend time with you. We invite you for holidays." And those words, "let me include me," echoed in my head, as if my presence in my own son's life was some kind of charity they provided, while Michael tried to soften the moment with that familiar wheedling tone from his teenage years, saying, "Mom, you're overreacting." So Cheryl made a little joke on Instagram. "So what? We've been family for 8 years." And I repeated the words slowly, a joke, then pulled out my phone and read the post aloud. "Perfect day without the drama queen," before asking, which part was the funny part, Michael? The part where I was hospitalized, or the part where none of you cared enough to visit? And Cheryl snapped back defensively, "We were busy. The twins had soccer practice, and Michael had that conference call with Tokyo. We can't drop everything every time you have a little medical episode." And hearing my heart attack reduced to a little medical episode made my stomach twist, until Richard cleared his throat and brought the focus back to business, saying, "The documentation is quite thorough. The total amount of $47,000 will be repaid over 36 months at 6% interest. First payment is due in 30 days, which turned Michael's face from red to purple as he blurted out, $1,300 a month. "Mom, you know we can't afford that right now." And I stood up, surprised by how steady I felt as I answered, "Then, perhaps you should have thought about that before you decided I was a drama queen having a little medical episode," while Cheryl hissed angrily, "This is insane. You're punishing us because your feelings got hurt." And I replied firmly, "No, Cheryl. I'm simply treating our financial relationship the way I should have from the beginning, like adults conducting business rather than a parent enabling ungrateful children." Just as the twins came running in from the backyard, and for a moment my resolve wavered when 7-year-old Emma threw her arms around my waist and asked, "Grandma Dorothy, did you bring us presents?" making my heart clench because this was the part I'd been dreading most. And I forced a gentle smile and told her, "Not today, sweetheart, but I'll see you soon." Kissing the top of her head and inhaling that sweet little girl scent that always made me want to forgive everything. And Michael must have seen my hesitation because his expression shifted and he said, "Mom, think about the kids. You're really going to let money come between us and your only grandchildren." And there it was, the manipulation I should have recognized years ago, using the children as leverage, making me choose between my financial security and access to my grandchildren. And for just a moment I wavered. Then I remembered lying alone in that hospital bed wondering if I was going to die, surrounded by strangers, while my family enjoyed their perfect day. So I told him calmly, "Michael, The children will always be welcome in my home. But the Bank of Dorothy is officially closed, and as I walked to my car, I heard Cheryl's voice through the open window saying, "I told you this would happen if we didn't put her in that assisted living place last year." And the words assisted living hit me like ice water, because they'd been planning to warehouse me while continuing to drain my savings, and suddenly the pieces were finally clicking into place. So, I sat in my car for a moment, hands shaking slightly as I processed what I had just learned, realizing this wasn't just about the Instagram post or the missed hospital visits. They'd been planning to control my life completely. And then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that read, "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Jennifer Walsh from Sunset Manor, Assisted Living. Your son made inquiries about our services last year but never followed up. Are you still interested in our facility?" And I stared at the message, my blood running cold as I understood that Michael had actually contacted assisted living facilities while I was healthy, independent, and financially supporting his lifestyle. So I forwarded the text to Richard with a message saying, "We need to talk. This goes deeper than I thought." And when I met the private investigator Richard recommended, she looked nothing like what I'd expected. Because Sandra Martinez was a 40-some former police detective, with kind eyes and a very serious expression as she reviewed the information I'd provided and asked, "You suspect your son and daughter-in-law were planning to have you declared incompetent?" While we sat in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe far from anywhere Michael or Cheryl might accidentally see us, and I explained that I'd spent the previous week gathering documents and trying to piece together a timeline that was becoming more disturbing by the day, then handed her the assisted living brochure I'd found hidden in Michael's car when I'd borrowed it last month, along with the text from Sunset Manor, and said, "Look at this," plus the text from Sunset Manor and this. Knowing that at last someone was going to help me uncover the truth, I handed her a thick folder containing all the medical appointment summaries I had requested from my doctor's office, trying to keep my hands steady as I explained that 3 different times over the past year, someone had called asking about my cognitive abilities and whether I showed signs of confusion or memory loss. And every one of those calls had been made by someone claiming to be a concerned family member, which made my stomach twist as Sandra read directly from the notes and said, "Dr. Williams documented that you showed no signs of cognitive decline during your regular checkups," which means someone was fishing for evidence that didn't exist. And I sipped my coffee, forcing myself to stay calm, while I told her, "Sandra, I need to know how deep this goes. What exactly were they planning?" And she slowly pulled out a legal pad and answered in that careful professional voice, "Based on what you've shown me, it appears they may have been building a case for guardianship, and if they could demonstrate you were becoming mentally incompetent, they could petition the court to make Michael your legal guardian." And the word hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Guardian, a title that would have given him complete control over my finances, my living situation, my medical decisions, and the assisted living facility. Because, as Sandra explained, once someone has guardianship, they can make housing decisions for you, and the person who's supposed to be protecting you gets to decide where you live. And her expression turned grim as she added that she had seen cases where perfectly competent seniors end up locked in facilities while their children drained their assets, which made my hands start shaking as I asked, how close were they to succeeding? And she answered, "That's what we need to find out. I'll need permission to investigate their financial situation, their communications with assisted living facilities, and any legal consultations they may have had." So I signed the authorization forms without hesitation and told her to do whatever you need to do. And over the next 2 weeks, Sandra uncovered a conspiracy that was both more elaborate and more heartless than I had ever imagined, calling me on a Thursday evening with her preliminary report and saying, "Dorothy, you're going to want to sit down for this." And even though I was already sitting, I gripped the arm of my chair anyway as she told me that Michael and Cheryl consulted with an elder law attorney 6 months ago about the guardianship process and also met with a financial planner about how to manage a large inheritance. And most disturbing of all, they had been researching something called quiet title procedures, which I didn't understand until I asked, "What does that mean?" And she explained that it was a legal process for transferring property ownership when the current owner is unable to manage their affairs. And suddenly the room started spinning as the truth hit me. My house. And she confirmed it by saying they were planning to move you into assisted living, claim you were incompetent to manage your finances, and eventually transfer ownership of your assets to Michael as your guardian, even suggesting that the Instagram post about the drama, queen was probably their way of establishing a narrative about your emotional instability, and I thought back to all the times over the past year when Cheryl had made little comments about my memory, asking if I was feeling confused about simple things or suggesting I seemed overwhelmed by basic decisions, realizing with a cold chill that it hadn't been casual conversation at all, but careful reconnaissance. And Sandra continued, telling me there's more, explaining that she had traced where the emergency loans Michael asked for had actually gone, and that the $20,000 for their roof repair went toward a family vacation to Hawaii, while the $15,000 for Emma's medical expenses paid for Cheryl's plastic surgery. And each revelation felt like another heavy blow to the chest, as I understood they had been systematically stealing from me, while quietly building a case to take everything I owned. So I asked her in a small voice, "Sandra, what are my options?" And she answered that the good news is that I caught this before they filed any legal proceedings, but the bad news is that family financial elder abuse is incredibly difficult to prosecute, especially when it involves loans that weren't properly documented, which made me think immediately about the loan documents Richard had prepared, the ones that had made Michael so angry. And I asked, "What if I already have documentation now?" And she said that helps, but then asked gently, "Dorothy, I have to ask, what outcome are you hoping for here? Legal justice, financial recovery, or something else?" And I looked out my living room window at the garden. I'd tended for 15 years in the house I'd worked 3 jobs to pay for, thinking about the grandchildren who'd been used as weapons against me and the son I'd apparently raised to be a predator. And finally, I told her, I want them to understand exactly what they almost lost, and I want to make sure they never get the chance to try this again. And she was quiet for a moment before saying that's going to require a very specific kind of strategy. To which I replied firmly, "Then, let's strategize." And 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in the offices of Premier Estate, planning meeting with someone Michael and Cheryl had never heard of, my new financial advisor Catherine Wells, with documents spread across her mahogany desk that would have shocked my son if he'd known they existed. And she looked at me with open admiration and said, "Mrs. Hartwell, I have to say, this is one of the most comprehensive asset protection strategies I've ever implemented on such short notice." And I smiled, feeling genuinely content for the first time in months as I answered, "Catherine, when you discover your own family has been plotting to steal everything you've worked for, it certainly clarifies your priorities." Because Sandra's investigation had been thorough, but it was Catherine who had shown me how to build an impenetrable fortress around my assets. And over the past month I had quietly transferred my house into a revocable trust, moved my savings into accounts Michael couldn't access, and set up legal structures that would make any future guardianship attempts virtually impossible. Yet the most satisfying part was what came next as I looked over the final papers and asked, "The charity foundation is fully established," and she confirmed with a professional smile that the Dorothy Hartwell Foundation for Senior Financial Protection is now a registered 501c3. You've donated 60% of your liquid assets, which provides you with significant tax benefits while ensuring the money can never be touched by family members seeking guardianship, Catherine explained. And I felt a quiet sense of pride, knowing I'd kept enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But the bulk of my savings, nearly $200,000, was now dedicated to helping other seniors avoid the trap I'd almost fallen into. And when I asked about the media component, Catherine smiled and said, "Your first speaking engagement is next week at the community center. Local news has confirmed they'll be covering your presentation on elder financial abuse warning signs." Just as my phone buzzed with a text from Michael saying, "Mom, we need to talk. Cheryl thinks maybe we all overreacted. Can we start fresh?" And I felt nothing but calm, as I thought, too little, too late. Because Sandra had delivered copies of the legal documents to my house yesterday, right on schedule, and Michael and Cheryl would have received their copies this morning. Evidence of every lie, every manipulation, every step in their guardianship scheme. So I told Catherine while showing her the text, "He's probably just now realizing his inheritance has vanished." And when she asked gently, "How does that feel?" I considered the question seriously and realized that 6 months ago the thought of Michael being upset with me would have sent me into a panic of guilt and self-doubt. But now I could honestly answer, liberating, surprised by how true it was. And that evening at precisely 6 o'clock my doorbell rang, and Michael and Cheryl stood on my front porch, both looking haggarded and desperate, with Cheryl actually crying. the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in years, while Michael's voice cracked slightly as he said, "Mom, we got the documents from your investigator. This is all a huge misunderstanding." And I invited them in, more curious than angry at this point, watching them sit stiffly on my couch while I took my favorite armchair, feeling oddly like I was receiving guests rather than hosting my own family. And I asked pleasantly, "Which part was the misunderstanding? The part where you planned to have me declared incompetent, or the part where you were going to steal my house?" As Cheryl's tears increased and she said, "We never wanted to hurt you. We thought you'd be happier in a place with people your own age, where you'd have activities and care if you needed it." And I answered calmly, "While you lived in my house and spent my money," as Michael protested that the attorney said it was legal. "If someone can't manage their finances anymore, family has to step in. We were trying to protect you." Which made me pull out my phone and play a recording Sandra had made, where Michael's voice came through clearly saying, "The old woman's loaded, but she's never going to spend it. Might as well make sure it goes to people who can actually use it." And I watched the blood drain from Michael's face as he stammered, "How did you?" before I cut him off and said, "That was a private conversation with your attorney discussing strategies for taking control of my assets." Interesting definition of protection. And Cheryl stood up abruptly saying, "Fine, we made mistakes, but you're our family. Families forgive each other." Which made me look at this woman who'd spent 2 years systematically undermining my independence, who'd posted about my heart attack like it was an inconvenience to her social media presence. And I told her firmly, "Cheryl, family members don't plot to steal each other's homes, they don't celebrate when their mother-in-law is hospitalized, and they certainly don't use children as emotional blackmail." And Michael's voice rose as he demanded, "So that's it, you're going to cut us off completely? What about Emma and Jake? You'd really punish innocent children because you're angry at us?" And there it was again, the manipulation, the assumption that I owed them access to my resources regardless of how they treated me. So I answered steadily, "Michael, your children will always be welcome in my home. You and Cheryl, however, are no longer welcome in my life. The loan repayment stands. If you default, I'll take you to court." And I walked them to the door feeling strangely peaceful before adding, "Oh, and you might want to watch the local news next week. I'm doing an interview about elder financial abuse. I won't mention names, of course, but the story might sound familiar." And as their car pulled away, I realized I wasn't sad or angry anymore. I was proud, because for the first time in 8 years I'd chosen my own well-being over someone else's convenience. And later my phone rang with Emma's bright, innocent voice saying, "Grandma Dorothy, Mummy says we can't see you anymore because you're being mean, but I miss you," which made my heart clench even though my resolve held firm as I told her, "Sweetheart, you can visit me anytime you want, but it will have to be at my house with people who love both of us." And after I hung up, I sat in my quiet living room surrounded by photos and mementos of a life I'd built with my own hands, realizing that, for the first time in years, the silence felt peaceful rather than lonely, knowing that tomorrow I'd start telling my story publicly and helping other seniors recognize the warning signs I'd almost missed. But tonight I was simply going to enjoy the profound satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged, in my own home, in control of my own life, safe from people who'd confused love with ownership. And when the community center was packed beyond capacity for my first speaking engagement, I took the stage expecting maybe 30 or 40 people, mostly seniors worried about their own families, only to find myself looking at an audience of nearly 200, including several younger adults, taking notes and at least 3 news cameras. And I began with, "Good morning, my name is Dorothy Hartwell. And 6 months ago, I nearly lost everything to the people I trusted most, my own family." Feeling the room grow so quiet, I could hear the air conditioning humming, as I realized I'd practiced this speech dozens of times, but facing real people with their own stories of betrayal and manipulation made every word feel heavier. How many of you have been asked by your adult children to help with emergency expenses? I asked the audience, and about half the hands in the room went up as people glanced around at one another. Then I continued, "How many have been told you're too trusting or too generous with your money?" And even more hands rose into the air. And finally I asked, "And how many have had family members suggest you might be forgetting things or getting confused about simple decisions?" And by now, nearly every senior in the audience had raised their hand at least once, which made it painfully clear that these weren't isolated incidents, but warning signs of a systematic approach to financial elder abuse that's happening in families across America. So, I told them about Michael and Cheryl's guardianship scheme, about the fake emergency loans, about lying in a hospital bed while they celebrated their perfect day without the drama queen. But I also told them about Catherine Wells, about Sandra Martinez, about the legal tools available to protect themselves. And during the question and answer session, a woman in her 70s stood up and said, "My daughter keeps saying I should put her name on my bank accounts just in case. She says it's normal for families. Is it?" And the murmur that went through the audience told me this woman wasn't alone. So I answered her carefully, "Ma'am, adding anyone to your bank accounts gives them immediate access to withdraw every penny you own. It should only be done with extreme caution, and preferably with legal documentation of the terms." And then, a man near the back raised his hand and asked, "What if it's already too late? What if you've already given them access and now you're seeing problems?" And I looked directly at him and said, "It's never too late to protect what's left." I was 3 weeks away from losing my house when I started fighting back, and after the presentation I was surrounded by people sharing their own stories, horror stories of children who'd moved into family homes and refused to leave, of grandchildren being used as emotional weapons, of seniors who discovered too late that their helpful relatives had been systematically draining their accounts. But I also heard stories of courage, of people who'd recognized the warning signs and taken action, of families where honest conversations had prevented misunderstandings from becoming exploitation. And the local news interview aired that evening, and I'd been nervous about going public, worried about embarrassing Michael or affecting the twins, but watching this segment I felt only satisfaction because I'd spoken carefully, never mentioning names, focusing on systemic issues rather than personal grievances. And my phone started ringing before the interview was even over as someone said, "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Margaret Thompson from Channel 7 in Denver. We'd like to interview you for a segment on elder financial abuse. Would you be available this week?" And 3 more news stations called that night, along with 2 radio shows and a podcast about family relationships, because apparently my story had struck a nerve with people far beyond my small town. But the call that mattered most came at 11 p.m., with Emma's voice whispering, "Grandma Dorothy, I saw you on TV. Daddy's really mad, but I thought you looked pretty." And my throat tightened as I replied, "Thank you, sweetheart. How are you doing?" And she answered, "Mommy and Daddy fight a lot now about money stuff. Daddy said you stole his inheritance, but Mommy said you never promised him anything. I don't understand grown-up stuff." And I realized that neither did I, apparently, until it was almost too late. So I told her gently, "Emma, honey, your daddy and I are having some disagreements right now, but that doesn't change how much I love you and Jake." And she asked hopefully, "Can we still visit you?" And I looked around my quiet house, thinking about the foundation I was building, the seniors I was helping, the life I was creating on my own terms, and answered, "Anytime you want, sweetheart. But it might be a while before your parents feel comfortable with that." And after she hung up, I sat with my tea processing the day, realizing that 6 months ago I'd been a lonely widow whose greatest fear was being abandoned by her family. And now I was a public speaker, a foundation director, and apparently some kind of reluctant expert on financial elder abuse. And the irony wasn't lost on me because Michael and Cheryl's scheme to isolate and control me had backfired spectacularly, since instead of making me more dependent, their betrayal had forced me to build a completely independent life. And instead of keeping me quiet and compliant, their manipulation had given me a platform and a voice. And just then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that read, "Saw you on the news tonight. Thank you for giving me the courage to ask my son for documentation of the $30K I loaned him last year." Turns out he's been lying about what it was for Margaret K., and that text was worth more than any amount of money Michael could ever repay, because I was building something now that was bigger than my hurt feelings or family drama. I was creating resources for people who found themselves in situations I'd almost been trapped in. And tomorrow I had 3 more speaking engagements scheduled and a meeting with a publisher interested in turning my story into a book. And I thought about how Michael had called me a drama queen and realized turns out he was right, because I was dramatic enough to survive his attempted financial murder and turn it into something that would help thousands of other people. And sometimes the best revenge is living well. And sometimes it's making sure your story prevents other families from making the same mistakes yours did. Wang. And then the letter arrived on a Tuesday. delivered by registered mail with Michael's signature required, and I watched from my living room window as the postal worker handed him the thick envelope and saw his face change as he read the return address. Morrison and Associates, attorneys at law, knowing it had been 2 months since my television interview, and the response had been overwhelming. The Dorothy Hartwell Foundation was now receiving calls from seniors across 3 states, and I'd been invited to speak at conferences in Chicago and Atlanta. And most importantly, I'd been working with Richard Morrison on something that would ensure Michael and Cheryl could never attempt their guardianship scheme again. And the phone rang within an hour of the mail delivery, with Michael's voice tight with barely controlled rage as he demanded, "Mom, what the hell is this?" And I answered calmly, "I assume you're referring to the competency evaluation report," keeping my tone pleasant and professional as I continued. Dr. Sarah Chen is one of the most respected geriatric psychiatrists in the state. Her assessment should put any concerns about my mental capacity to rest permanently. Remembering that the 3-hour evaluation had been Sandra's idea, because if Michael and Cheryl ever tried to claim I was incompetent, we wanted ironclad proof of my mental acuity from an unimpeachable source. So I went on deliberately, a perfect score on cognitive testing, enjoying the silence on his end as I added, excellent emotional regulation, superior financial reasoning abilities, and I quote, no evidence whatsoever of diminished capacity or decision-making ability, and Dr. Chen was particularly impressed by my strategic planning skills. And finally he asked in a smaller voice, "Why are you doing this to us?" And the whine in his voice reminded me of his teenage years when consequences finally caught up with his choices. So I told him firmly, "Michael, I'm protecting myself from people who tried to steal my home and my independence. The fact that those people happened to be my son and daughter-in-law is unfortunate, but it doesn't change what you attempted." And he protested, "We never tried to steal anything. We were worried about you living alone, making financial decisions without help. We thought you could manipulate me into assisted living while you moved into my house and managed my assets." Sandra's investigation was very thorough, and there was a long pause before he said in disbelief, "Then you hired a private investigator to spy on your own family to protect myself from people who were planning to have me declared incompetent." "Yes," and I could hear Cheryl's voice in the background, sharp and angry, though I couldn't make out the words, as Michael insisted, "Mom, this has gone too far. Cheryl's talking about moving out of state, taking the kids somewhere we can start fresh." And there it was, the final card in their manipulation deck. Take away my access to Emma and Jake unless I capitulated to their demands. So I replied evenly, "That's certainly your choice, Michael, though I'm curious how you'll afford a move while you're still repaying the $47,000 in loans." And he snapped back, "Those weren't loans, they were gifts. Family helping family." And I answered, "Then you won't mind the payment schedule Richard prepared, $1,300 a month for 36 months, starting next week." And he exploded, "We can't afford $1,300 a month. You know that." And I did know that because Sandra's financial investigation had revealed that Michael and Cheryl were living far beyond their means, using credit cards and loans to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford, and my emergency money had been subsidizing their spending for years. So I told him calmly, "Then I suggest you adjust your lifestyle accordingly. Downsize the house, trade in the BMWs, cancel the country club membership, live within your actual means for once." And he accused me bitterly, "You're really going to destroy your own family over money." And the audacity was breathtaking, because they'd tried to have me declared incompetent, steal my house, and warehouse me in assisted living. But I was the one destroying the family. So I said quietly, "Michael, I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply refusing to finance my own victimization any longer." And he tried again. "The kids ask about you. Emma cries because she doesn't understand why Grandma doesn't visit anymore." And my chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay focused as I answered, "Emma is welcome to visit me anytime, you know that, but I won't pretend that what you and Cheryl did was acceptable just to maintain access to my grandchildren." And he said angrily, "So that's it, you're choosing pride over family." And I replied steadily, "I'm choosing self-respect over abuse. There's a difference." And after I hung up, I sat quietly for a few minutes processing the conversation. Because a year ago Michael's threats to move away with the children would have sent me into a panic, and I would have apologized, capitulated, done whatever was necessary to maintain the relationship. But now I felt sad but not desperate, since the foundation work was giving me purpose, and the speaking engagements were connecting me with people who valued my experience and insight, and I had created a life that didn't depend on other people's approval or access to their children. And then my phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Wells saying, "The trust modifications are complete. Your assets are now protected by structures that would require a team of attorneys and several years to challenge successfully," followed by another text from Sandra saying, "The background check on the assisted living facility reveals they've been investigated twice for questionable practices regarding patient assets. Your instincts about avoiding that place were correct." And finally a message from someone I didn't recognize that read, "Mrs. Hartwell, my name is Patricia Johnson. I heard your interview on the radio last week and realized my daughter has been using the exact same tactics you described. With your advice and a good attorney, I stopped her before she could get guardianship. Thank you for saving my independence, a fellow strong woman." And I printed Patricia's message and added it to the folder I kept of similar letters and emails. Nearly 50 now from people who'd recognized the warning signs and taken action to protect themselves. And outside my window I could see Michael and Cheryl loading suitcases into their car, probably going to stay with her parents while they figured things out, and part of me wanted to run outside, apologize for everything, offered to forgive and forget just to have access to Emma and Jake again. But a larger part of me recognized that giving in now would only teach them that threats and emotional blackmail still worked, that I was still the same woman who could be manipulated and controlled. I wasn't that woman anymore. I was someone who hired private investigators when threatened, someone who built legal fortresses around her assets, someone who turned personal betrayal into public education. I was, as Michael had once called me, a drama queen, and I was finally proud of it. The call came at 6 o'clock in the morning, jolting me from sleep. Unknown number, but something made me answer anyway. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Detective Rebecca Santos with the State Attorney General's office. I need to speak with you about your son, Michael." I sat up, fully awake now. "Is everything all right? Has something happened to him, ma'am? We've been investigating a financial fraud scheme involving assisted living facilities. Your son's name has come up in our investigation." My blood went cold. "What kind of fraud scheme? Can we meet in person? This isn't something I want to discuss over the phone." 2 hours later, Detective Santos was sitting in my living room with a folder thick with documents and photographs. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of tired eyes that suggested she'd seen too much family-related cruelty in her career. "Mrs. Hartwell, we've been tracking a network of individuals who target seniors for financial exploitation. They work with certain assisted living facilities to create artificial emergencies that require guardianship proceedings." She opened her folder and showed me a photograph of a man I'd never seen before. "This is David Kellerman. He approaches families with senior members who have significant assets. He helps them build cases for incompetency declarations." "What does this have to do with Michael?" Detective Santos pulled out another photograph. This one showed Michael and Cheryl sitting across from David Kellerman in what looked like a restaurant booth. "This photo was taken 3 months ago. We believe your son and daughter-in-law hired Mr. Kellerman to help them gain guardianship over you." The room started spinning. It was one thing to know Michael had consulted with an attorney about guardianship. It was another to learn he'd been working with professional criminals. "What exactly does this network do?" "They help family members manufacture evidence of mental incompetence, then fast-track guardianship proceedings through judges who don't ask too many questions. Once they have control, they place the senior in a facility that overcharges for care while systematically draining their assets." Detective Santos showed me more photographs, a luxury assisted living facility that looked more like a prison, documents showing residents charged $15,000 a month for basic care while their families sold off their homes and investments. "How many people are involved in this scheme?" "We've identified at least 40 families across 6 states. The estimated theft is over $12 million. $12 million stolen from seniors who trusted their own children." "Mrs. Hartwell, we believe your son paid Mr. Kellerman $20,000 for his services, the emergency loan for Emma's medical expenses, the money that had actually paid for Cheryl's plastic surgery, except apparently some of it had gone to hire a professional to help them steal my life. What do you need from me?" Detective Santos leaned forward. "We need you to consider wearing a wire." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You want me to spy on my own son? Michael has been trying to contact you, hasn't he? Attempting to reconcile?" I thought about the increasingly desperate voicemails he'd been leaving. The flowers that arrived yesterday with a card reading, "Please forgive me, Mom. We need to talk." Yes, but I've been ignoring him. What if you didn't? What if you agreed to meet with him and let him explain himself? I stared at the photographs spread across my coffee table. My son, sitting with a professional criminal, planning to have me declared incompetent and warehoused in a facility that would slowly drain every penny I'd worked 40 years to save. You think he'll confess? Criminals get sloppy when they're desperate. Mr. Kellerman has been arrested and his associates are talking to save themselves. Michael knows his scheme is falling apart. He might say things he wouldn't normally say. I thought about Emma and Jake, innocent children caught in the middle of their parents' greed. About the seniors I'd been speaking to, sharing my story to prevent exactly this kind of exploitation. If I do this, what happens to Michael? Detective Santos's expression was compassionate but firm. "Ma'am, your son hired a professional criminal to help him steal your home and your independence. The state takes elder financial abuse very seriously. He could go to prison. He could go to prison for what he already did. Mrs. Hartwell, we're just trying to gather evidence to stop him from doing it to other families." I looked around my living room, thinking about how close I'd come to losing all of this. If I hadn't had that heart attack, if I hadn't seen Cheryl's Instagram post, if I hadn't gotten angry enough to fight back, I'd probably be sitting in a sterile facility right now while Michael sold my furniture and Cheryl redecorated my house. Other families. Mr. Kellerman's records show he was already working with your son to identify other potential targets, elderly neighbors, friends from your church, people who trust your family and might be susceptible to similar schemes. Mrs. Henderson from next door, Sarah Williams from my book club, gentle, trusting women who'd known Michael since he was a child and would never suspect he might try to hurt them. "When do you need an answer?" Michael called this morning, asking to meet with you tomorrow afternoon. "If you're willing to help us, we need to prepare today." I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, trusting, accommodating, willing to sacrifice anything to maintain family harmony. Then I thought about the woman I'd become, someone who hired private investigators and built legal fortresses and turned personal betrayal into public education. Detective Santos, if wearing a wire helps prevent other families from going through what I've experienced, then yes, I'll do it. She nodded grimly. "I should warn you, Mrs. Hartwell, what you hear tomorrow might be difficult. When people think they're talking to someone they can manipulate, they often reveal more than you might want to know." I thought about the Instagram posts celebrating my heart attack, about the assisted living brochures hidden in Michael's car, about the professional criminal he'd hired to steal my life. "Detective, I think I've already heard the worst of it." But as it turned out, I was wrong. The wire was smaller than I'd expected. Just a tiny device taped under my blouse. Detective Santos and her team were parked in an unmarked van, across the street from the coffee shop where Michael had asked to meet me. I felt strangely calm as I walked in, spotted him at a corner table, and forced myself to smile like nothing had changed. "Mom," Michael stood up awkwardly, clearly unsure whether to hug me or shake my hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." I sat across from him, noticing how tired he looked. Dark circles under his eyes, rumpled shirt, the kind of stressed appearance that comes from sleeping badly for weeks. "You said it was urgent." He nodded, glancing around nervously. "Mom, I need to tell you some things about what really happened with the guardianship stuff, about why we did it." The recording device felt warm against my skin as I leaned forward encouragingly. "I'm listening. First, you have to understand that we never meant to hurt you. Everything we did, we thought it was for your own good." The lies came so easily to him. I wondered if he actually believed them or if this was just the story he'd practiced. "Explain it to me." Michael pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of a house I didn't recognize. Massive, sprawling with a circular driveway and what looked like a 4-car garage. "This is in Scottsdale. Cheryl found it 3 months ago. It's perfect for the kids. Good schools, pool, enough room for everyone." He paused meaningfully, "Including you. It's lovely. But I don't understand what this has to do with we were going to surprise you, move you to Arizona with us, get you settled in a beautiful place where you'd have professional care available, activities with people your own age. The facility we looked at has golf, art classes, even a library, the assisted living facility." He was presenting their plan to warehouse me as a gift. "That's very thoughtful. But Michael, I'm happy in my own home." His expression shifted, becoming more desperate. "Mom, you can't see it, but you're declining." The forgetfulness, the confusion about financial decisions, the way you overreacted to that little Instagram post. "Cheryl and I have been worried sick." I almost laughed. Little Instagram post. Celebrating my heart attack was little, what financial confusion. All those loans you gave us without proper documentation. A competent person would have insisted on contracts. Payment terms. You just handed over money because we asked. That's not normal behavior for someone handling their finances responsibly. The audacity was breathtaking. He was using my generosity as evidence of incompetence. So, you decided I needed professional help. We consulted with an expert. Yes, someone who helps families navigate these difficult transitions. He leaned forward earnestly. Mom, guardianship isn't about taking anything away from you. It's about protecting you from people who might try to take advantage. What people? Michael's face darkened. That private investigator you hired for one. Do you have any idea how much she charged you? Over $8,000 to dig up dirt on your own family. A competent person wouldn't have fallen for that scam, protecting me by stealing my house and warehousing me against my will, while simultaneously accusing the people actually protecting me of being scams. The psychological manipulation was masterful. Tell me about the expert you consulted. His name was David Kellerman. He specializes in helping families with senior care transitions. He explained how the legal system works, how to document concerns about someone's declining capacity, what kind of documentation. Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. My heart stopped as I recognized it. My own handwriting filled the pages. We kept track of incidents that showed you were having problems, memory lapses, poor judgment calls, emotional outbursts. He opened the notebook and read, March 15th, Mom forgot she'd already paid her electric bill. Paid it twice. March 22nd, couldn't remember the name of her neighbor's new dog. Seemed confused when asked. April 3rd, became irrationally angry when asked simple questions about her finances. Each entry was a normal moment twisted into evidence of mental decline. Paying a bill twice, something that happens to everyone occasionally. Not remembering a neighbor's pet's name. Hardly a sign of dementia. Becoming angry when interrogated about personal finances. Actually a healthy response. Michael, these are normal things. Everyone forgets details sometimes. Not like this, Mom. Kellerman explained that families often don't notice the early signs because they happen gradually. He helped us see the pattern. What was the plan once you had guardianship? Michael's expression brightened as if he was describing a wonderful vacation. The house in Scottsdale has a separate suite, perfect for you. 2 bedrooms, a sitting area, your own entrance. The assisted living facility is only 10 minutes away for when you need more intensive care. And my house here, we'd sell it, obviously. Use the money for your care expenses. Kellerman said the average stay in memory care is about 4 years, so we needed to plan accordingly. For years, they'd calculated exactly how long they expected me to live and planned to spend my money accordingly. What about the foundation? I started. Michael's face hardened. Mom, that's exactly the kind of poor financial decision we're trying to protect you from. Giving away hundreds of thousands of dollars to strangers because you're angry at your family. Kellerman said, that kind of spite-based spending is a classic sign of diminished capacity. Using my own advocacy work as evidence that I was mentally incompetent, I had to admire the thoroughness of their gaslighting. Did Kellerman charge you for this advice? Michael hesitated just long enough to tell me the truth. He's a professional consultant. Of course, there were fees involved. How much? That's not important. What matters is protecting you. I leaned back, processing everything he'd said. The recording device was capturing every word of his confession. His casual description of the conspiracy to steal my independence. His complete lack of recognition that what he'd planned was criminal. Michael, what if I don't want to move to Arizona? What if I want to stay in my own home? His mask slipped completely. Mom, you don't get to make that choice anymore. That's the whole point of guardianship. When someone can't make responsible decisions for themselves, the family has to step in. And if I fight it, Kellerman said family guardianship disputes rarely go the way the senior wants them to, especially when there's documented evidence of declining capacity and a history of poor financial judgment. There it was, the threat underneath all the concern and caring. Submit to their control or be forcibly declared incompetent. I stood up slowly, looking down at this stranger who somehow had my son's face. Michael, I need to use the restroom. I'll be right back. In the bathroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the confused, declining senior Michael had described. She was someone who'd built a legal fortress, exposed a criminal conspiracy, and was about to help law enforcement protect other families. When I returned to the table, Detective Santos was sitting in my chair. Michael's face was white as paper. Mr. Hartwell, she said calmly, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse." As they led him away in handcuffs, Michael turned back to me with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Mom, I was trying to protect you. Why would you do this to your own family?" I looked at this man I'd raised who'd hired criminals to steal my life and presented it as love. "Michael, I am protecting my family. I'm protecting other people's families from you." The recording device under my blouse felt warm against my skin, evidence of a conversation that would prevent other seniors from facing the nightmare I'd almost lived through. Sometimes being a drama queen means making sure the right people hear your story. 6 months later, I was sitting in a packed courtroom watching my son's sentencing hearing. Michael had pled guilty to elder financial abuse conspiracy as part of a deal that would keep him out of federal prison, but would require 5 years of probation and restitution payments to the state's Victim Assistance Fund. Cheryl had filed for divorce 3 weeks after his arrest. She'd moved to her parents' house in Oregon with Emma and Jake, cutting off all contact with Michael and, unfortunately, with me. I understood her need to protect the children from the media attention, but that didn't make it hurt any less. David Kellerman received 8 years in federal prison. The criminal network he'd built had stolen more than $15 million from seniors across 7 states. The judge called it one of the most callous and systematic exploitation schemes she'd ever seen. But what mattered most to me was what had grown from the ashes of my family's betrayal. The Dorothy Hartwell Foundation was now operating in 12 states, providing legal assistance and education to seniors facing financial exploitation. We'd helped over 300 families recognize warning signs and take protective action. We'd lobbied for stronger guardianship oversight laws and created a rapid response network for families in crisis. My book, The Drama Queen's Guide to Family Financial Abuse, had become an unexpected bestseller. The title was my own small act of defiance, reclaiming the label Michael had used to dismiss me and turning it into a badge of honor. I'd received thousands of letters from readers, but the one I treasured most was written in careful 7-year-old handwriting. "Dear Grandma Dorothy, Mommy says we moved because Daddy made bad choices. I miss you, but I saw your picture in a magazine at the dentist office. The article said you help people who are scared. I hope you help lots of people. Love, Emma. P.S. Jake learned to ride a bike." I kept that letter on my desk next to a photo of us from happier times. Before I understood what Michael and Cheryl were capable of, standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, I was surrounded by reporters and advocates who'd come to hear the conclusion of what the media had dubbed the perfect son scandal. "Mrs. Hartwell," one reporter called out, "how does it feel to see your son sentenced for trying to defraud you?" I thought carefully before answering. "It feels like justice, not because I wanted to see my son punished, but because his actions are finally being recognized for what they were: criminal exploitation of someone he was supposed to protect." "Do you have any regrets about exposing the conspiracy?" That was the question I'd been asking myself for months. Did I regret destroying my relationship with Michael? Did I regret losing access to my grandchildren? Did I regret turning family pain into public advocacy? "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. "I regret that my son chose to see me as a resource to exploit rather than a person to respect. But I don't regret protecting myself, and I don't regret preventing other families from experiencing what I went through." "What's next for you?" I smiled, thinking about the speaking tour scheduled for next month, the new legislation being introduced based on our advocacy work, the Foundation's expansion into elder law reform. More drama, I suppose. The good kind, where standing up for yourself helps other people find their voice too. That evening, I sat in my living room, the same living room Michael had planned to sell, while I was warehoused in assisted living reading emails from seniors around the country. A woman in Texas whose daughter had been pressuring her to add names to her bank accounts. A man in Florida whose son was pushing him to sell his house and move in with family. People who'd read my book recognized their own situations and taken action to protect themselves. Each message was a reminder that my family's attempted betrayal had been transformed into something larger and more meaningful than personal revenge. I wasn't just the woman who'd caught her son trying to steal her house. I was someone who'd turned that experience into a movement. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. But I'd learned to answer those calls. They were often from people who needed help. "Is this Dorothy Hartwell, the woman who wrote the book?" "Yes, this is Dorothy." "Ma'am, my name is Patricia Williams. I think my grandson is trying to get me declared incompetent. I found some papers he hid in his room, and they look like the things you described in your book. I don't know what to do." I reached for my notebook, the one where I kept contact information for attorneys, investigators, and advocates in every state. Patricia, you've done the hardest part already. You've recognized what's happening and decided to protect yourself. Now, let me help you figure out your next steps. As I began walking Patricia through the warning signs and protective measures, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me wasn't the trusting, accommodating person I'd been a year and a half ago. This woman had survived attempted financial murder by her own family and turned that survival into a mission. Michael had been right about one thing. I was a drama queen. I was dramatic enough to fight back when attacked, dramatic enough to hire investigators and build legal fortresses, dramatic enough to turn personal betrayal into public education, and most importantly, dramatic enough to make sure that other seniors wouldn't have to lie alone in hospital beds, wondering if their families saw them as burdens to be managed rather than people to be loved. Some stories end with reconciliation and forgiveness. This one ended with something better. The knowledge that even the cruelest betrayal can become the foundation for protecting other people from the same fate. I was exactly where I belonged in my own home, in control of my own life, using my voice to make sure other people could say the same thing. The drama queen had found her stage, and the performance was far from over. Thanks, music, for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters,